Hi everyone, welcome back to another video, yes, on the Xiaomi Redmi Book 16. So this video, just like the title, as you can see, is all about gaming performance. Just how well does the 8-core Ryzen 7 4700U perform? It has a maximum turbo of 4.2 GHz, and the Radeon graphics can clock up in this model here up to 1600 MHz. However, just gonna let you know, because if you didn't see the first video on this particular model, the RAM speed is, well, it's a little bit slow actually for the Ryzen 7. It's only 2666 MHz. So what kind of impact is that going to have on gaming performance? I will test out a few titles. I have FPS counter up there. You can also see the CPU clocks. Okay, so just before I get started, I want to point out that I am on the latest drivers. And let's talk a little bit about the restrictions here with VRAM that a lot of people are concerned about. So you can see here we've got half a gigabyte dedicated, but there is shared memory as well. If you bring this up, that is the task manager, a look at the GPU, you can see shared GPU memory usage, and it will use a little bit of that, but not actually a lot. So this dedicated amount, if it was a bit higher, if Xiaomi had allocated maybe 1 gigabyte or 2 even with this model, let us choose in the BIOS, would have been a lot better. So latest drivers there's a little bit of information here. You can see that the core clock maximum is 1600 megahertz, and then memory clock is what is going to be restricting this with our total memory bandwidth here. That's the bottleneck. So I'm going to go straight into a game that everyone knows and loves, and that is GTA 5. So Grand Theft Auto 5, normally at night, the frame rate is a little bit lower than daytime here, but there's less traffic around, there's less NPCs on the screen. So we're getting a frame rate here, this is 1080p on lower settings, that you can see dips down to about 35 frames per second, and it's hovering just in the 40s here. Now you can probably hear a bit of fan noise that's actually coming through from the laptop itself. It's getting a little bit loud now. Fan RPM is pretty much at the maximum, and the thermals looking okay so far. Well, getting up actually to 90 degrees, as you can see, just touching on 90 now, and that is causing a tiny bit of throttling, but hardly anything. It's still at 1600 megahertz. So now in this area here, getting up to 50 frames per second. So I'll get out of the car, and let's just have a look what happens if we chop the resolution down from 1080p down to 720p. I think is going to help that frame rate definitely a lot. Alright, so we have almost doubled our frame rate here, just dropping that resolution right down. And I recommend that this game, 720p is probably a bit better, even though it doesn't look as sharp, of course. Now the fan RPMs did increase right up, and it's dropped that temperature down to 63 now from 90, which is good to see. Oh, we're still getting about 60 frames per second right here. And I'll just go into our cabin view. And that has improved the frame rate a little bit. Alright, so on to another title now, and we'll check the performance. So this title here on 720p is all I would run it on with integrated graphics. So if you push this up to 1080p, you're going to be always in the mid-20s or low 20 was the frame rate. And you don't want that. I mean, just scraping over 30 frames per second now, to me, does seem a little bit too slow. I mean, what happens when we head out to the port area here, which can sometimes cause a big frame dip? It's actually not too bad. So 35. I was expecting a little bit better here. It's again, I think that limitation we have with the RAM speed and the timings of that RAM is definitely causing slower performance than I expected, and a few others as well. I've commented this on the unboxing video. So have a look now at Project Cars, see how that one runs. Now I have this one set on 1080p, it's on the lowest settings, and visually it still, as you can see, looks very good. So we'll see how this one goes. Performance wise, looking very promising too, because it's around 45 frames per second. And a racing game, I think, is one of those games that at 45 frames per second, it is still quite playable here, as you can see. And this is doing quite a bit better than I expected. I did not expect it to actually be running this well on 1080p, that is. I thought I might have to lower it down to 720p, but it's good to see that this game at least is very playable as it is. I mean, you could tweak those settings up a little bit, or maybe if you wanted higher looking, better looking visuals, then go with 720p. But let's move on now to the next game and see how it performs. Now I wanted to give you an update here with the shared memory. You can see, okay, our dedicated GPU memory completely full, but it is actually using a little bit here of that dedicated memory. Not a lot, but it's good to see that it's actually going over at least 1 gigabyte there. So it's using something. So here we are with Tomb Raider. Now I did test it out with 1080p resolution, and it's just a choppy mess. It's about 24 frames per second. We're scraping on the lower setting preset here about 30 frames per second, and it's really not ideal at all. So you can't really go too much lower. I mean, you could try a lower resolution than this, and then you're really going to sacrifice on those visuals too. It's going to start to look pretty bad. So this title, I think, is just almost too demanding to be really playable. Though, I mean, here, at least I can stealth kill a few guys, but no, it's just a little bit too laggy for me anyway, personally.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
So an older title here, this is Skyrim, and I've got it on the medium preset, 1080p, and we are getting a playable frame rate here. Mid 40s, that is actually okay. And let's see if I can just provoke a bit of a fight here, not a fright, with the guards. And what are we going to get in terms of frame dips now? Down to 34. So he's on fire, but he's not even interested. There we go. Alright, let's see how low this is going to get. So it is definitely dropping down this performance to well below 30 frames per second there. So you probably want to go with low settings, 1080p. Even with this older title, which is kind of a little disappointing again. But I guess we can't expect too much from integrated graphics. So this title is Call of Duty World War II, and it's running surprisingly well. This is 720p only though, however, the resolution I'm running it at. If you test it on 1080p, you're going to get about half the frame rate. Well, not quite half, you get about 40, which is okay, but I'm just trying to keep that 60 frames per second or close to it here, of course, just to keep it playable. And this definitely is what I would class as playable, because you're getting up to even, look at that, 90, 80 frames per second. It is actually doing surprisingly well here, this game. Just did not expect to see this at all. So I'm going to move on now and test out a gaming benchmark, which is 3D Mark Firestrike. We'll take a look at that score. Okay, so here's the Firestrike score. So it gets just over 2,500 points here. Now the graphics score, yeah, that's of course the weakness, we know this, but look at that physics score. That is actually pretty good. That's not bad at all. The combined score, yeah, definitely on the low side here. Alright, and what about the thermals? So when you take a look at the thermals with my imaging camera here, you can see it's getting up to 46 degrees. That means it is warm to the touch, okay? It's what I would call getting too much, and hot to the touch is when it would be getting up to, say, 50 degrees. That's when it feels like it's almost starting, or could, like, not burn you, but it's becoming uncomfortable. It's only slightly uncomfortable here. Now, the fan, you probably heard some fan noise going on. The good thing is it does disappear away as soon as you stop gaming. It drops down to very low RPMs, and you can basically can't hear it, and it sometimes even turns off that fan. Now, what about our thermals? Okay, so we've gotten up to 96 in the end. Now, originally I thought it was just 93, but it's actually here 96 degrees. So it peaks at that, and we did see it hitting about 90 degrees sometimes in the beginning when I was playing GTA 5. And what about the wattage we're pulling? Now, the maximum I have seen when I do run benchmarks like Cinebench, check my first video on this laptop for that, you will see sometimes 44 watts. But gaming here, we got up to CPU package, we got up to 33. Okay, so it is pulling a lot more than the default. And the whole time I was using this right here, which is the turbo. You can see it just popped up in the left top corner there. You got silent mode, silence, balance, and then turbo. Turbo is for maximum performance, and this is the highest TDP setting that we can get with the Redmi Book 16. Alright, so there we go. I think it's just a little bit disappointing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Look at that performance of, say, GTA 5. It is great to have, well, a semi-playable frame rate, or pretty much a playable frame rate, right, at 1080p on the lower settings. That is brilliant for integrated graphics. And you can see it's using right up to the 44 watts. And yes, it's getting a bit warm to the touch. I'm seeing about 46 degrees temperatures around here, where you've got your W key in that area where you're normally touching, of course, the arrow keys, well, for gaming keys, is there, and that's where most of the heat is. So they could have done with an additional cooler maybe here just to pump out that hot air and stop it from getting so warm. So clearly some corners have been cut, especially with our RAM timing and, well, the RAM speed. I really feel it should be 3.2 gigahertz, the RAM that's in this, and I don't know if a BIOS update can fix that, if those RAM chips actually do support the higher clocks, that is. They might not. This could be lower quality RAM, clocked lower, and that is why this laptop is selling for what it is. Now, of course, guys, in the comments, there's going to be 20,000 comments, probably, saying get yourself a dedicated gaming laptop with a dedicated GPU, of course. Integrated graphics is not really for gaming, but if you're someone that just wants to game a little bit on the side, you're playing older titles or light engines like League of Legends or Counter-Strike, for example, then of course it can be done with this. But yes, get yourself dedicated like 1660 Ti or like the RTX 2060 with a 144 hertz screen, and that's really more of a gaming system. But this is all just to get an idea. You see the thermals as well, up to 93 degrees. It's getting warm, but remember, that's actually, it's handling 44 watts. That is our power limit that it gets up to on the turbo mode, which is a lot more than the normal, well, the stock 15 watts that would be set with this chip, normally in a lot of other laptops. So it is good that Xiaomi's letting us really push the maximum out of this, but then the RAM, it's kind of against that whole thing. It's counterintuitive there with that one. So thank you so much for watching this gaming review, you could say, of the Renby Book 16. Please check my first video for a hands-on look at the keyboard, various other aspects of this laptop. And I am working towards my full review. This is part of the process here, checking out gaming performance. So that should be up in about a week's time or 5 days. And I'll catch you then in the next video of the Renby Book 16.